You don't get these stories quite too often in the NHL, and so when a story like this does present itself, hey, I want to go out there, I want to make a video about it, I want to talk about this on the channel here. So today we're talking about the Minnesota Wild, and we're talking about a guy they took in the 2018 NHL Entry Draft in the third round, 63rd overall. His name is Jack McBain. McBain, as we said, 22 years old, 6'3", 201, a center, a left-handed shot. He's a guy from Toronto who plays a pretty solid two-way game, and the reason he was drafted in the 2018 draft was because, playing for the Toronto Junior Canadiens in the OJHL, he displayed a very strong two-way ability while also showing flashes of skill. Now, the OJHL, which is the league that he was playing in when he was drafted in 2018, it's not as good as the OHL. The OJHL is Junior A hockey. The OHL, instead, is Major Junior. He actually had an opportunity to go to the US and play in the junior system in the USHL, but due to a desire to stick around near home, he didn't go to the USHL, he stayed in Toronto. He also did not play in the OHL either, despite being drafted into that league. He stuck around in the OJHL in order to maintain his NCAA eligibility. Had he actually played an OHL game here or there, he would not have been able to go to college, which is ultimately what he ended up doing starting in 2018-19. Now, as we said, he was a two-way guy, he displayed a good 200-foot capacity to his game, and he had some flashes of skill that would show up once in a while. In the NCAA, though, we wouldn't really see too much of that, at least to the utmost potential, until the last season of his NCAA tenure. Now, let's go over the first 3 years first. He had 6 goals in all 3 of these seasons in 35 games, 34 games, and 24 games. So the goals per game number, while not too significant, was improving over time. He also had 13, 21, and 19 points respectively in his first 3 years, and because he actually started playing in BC in 2018-19, he actually did have some teammates that you might recognize. He played with Oliver Wahlstrom in 2018-19 as a freshman. As a sophomore, he went out there and he played with Alex Newhook. He also had a few other guys there. Matt Boldy was playing with the Boston College Eagles too. Spencer Knight as well. So there were a lot of teammates passing through the system that McBain was able to play with. But it wasn't until this year, 2021-2022, where he really showed off just what he had to give in the tank, offensively speaking. Remember those goals that we talked about? He was scouted beforehand actually having a pretty underrated shot. He wouldn't use it all too often, which is why he had 21 goals in the Junior A scene and 6 goals each as a freshman, junior, and sophomore in the NCAA. But this season, in 23 games played, Jack McBain has completely gone haywire, and he's at 19 goals in this season. He is under a goal a game after spending the previous 3 years only putting up 6 each. He's got 32 points in 23 games, so he's way over a point per game. The assist playmaking side of his game has always been pretty well-rounded, and he's still got that on display now. It's just everything about McBain that you wanted to see happen. The development and progression with his goal scoring, the sustained success of his playmaking, as well as the 200-foot game still being there as well. You have yourselves a prospect who, at 22 years old, has really jumped off the map in his 4th year of the NCAA. He also suited up for Team Canada at the Olympics, getting 2 points in 5 games over there. But the Minnesota Wild have themselves a pretty interesting conversation to have, because he is a Wild prospect and he is in their system. He remains unsigned because the second he puts the pen to the dotted line, he won't be able to play in the NCAA anymore, so we're waiting until that season concludes. However, on March 5th, we had ourselves a report from Jeff Marek on the Sportsnet 32 Thoughts segment. He brought up other NCAA talents over the past few years, like Adam Fox, Jimmy Vesey, Will Butcher, Zach Hyman, some of these guys whose names you've probably heard before, all for the same reasons. These guys that Marek brought up never wanted to sign with their NHL club. They had intentions to go elsewhere, which is why some of them went to free agency, they signed with other teams that were beyond the team that drafted them, and they wrote stories for themselves that were not dictated by whichever teams called their names at whichever NHL entry drafts they were drafted at. Adam Fox was a different one because he didn't actually go to free agency. He was traded to New York because it was very clear that he wanted to go to New York and only New York. But Marek brought up the idea as to whether or not Jack McBain would join that crop and whether or not the Wild would be able to sign this guy. This is the quote. He says during the intermission that the Wild may look to move Jack McBain because, hey, they're in a playoff race right now. They've got themselves a cap crunch coming up soon. So any shot that you have when it comes to acquiring assets that might help out your team, you go out there and you take it. Give it a few more days, and we had ourselves Elliotte Friedman on the 32 Thoughts article. This was published a few days after that TV hit, talking about the NHL trade market. Here's the article. You can go ahead into the description and read this if you want. But the eighth thought here by Elliotte Friedman writes about how Jeff Marek also reported that Jack McBain, taken 63rd by Minnesota in 2018, will go to free agency this summer. The Wild are looking for a second rounder, and a lot of eyes look slightly north, where Jack's father, Andrew McBain, played the first 6 seasons of his own 608-game NHL career. The Jets do not have a second rounder this year or next, yet. So, Andrew McBain, former Winnipeg Jet, probably not going over and seeing his son suit up with the Jets anytime soon because the Jets don't have a second rounder, bearing a report that they go out there and actually get one soon. But Jack McBain is a pretty good NCAA player in the 4th year of his eligibility who is now going to be on the trade market. If a second round pick is all it takes to get this guy, then honestly I see it as sort of a fair trade. Imagine this. You're going out there in the NHL Draft 2021 or 2022, actually 2022, yeah, it's 2022, my goodness. And you have a second round pick that is within the range of 32 to 64th overall. Let's say it's 50th. You can use that 50th overall pick on an 18-year-old guy who's going to go out there and develop a little bit more. If he's in the CHL, he'll probably take 2 years or maybe 3 if he's not lucky enough. If he's in the NCAA or if he's in the European systems, you might see him go over to the AHL by the time he's 19 or 20 years old. And it might take a pretty significant amount of time, like 3 or 4 or 5 total years, before you see that second round pick suit up in the NHL. You could go that route, or you could send that pick over to Minnesota and get Jack McBain instead, who is already 22 years old, who has already developed pretty well, and who has really exploded offensively this year to the point that he was selected for the Canadian squad at the Olympics. This is a guy whom you probably would have nothing to lose at selecting if you were to say, okay, would you rather have the 18-year-old guy at 50th overall or trade that 50th overall pick for this player instead? Here's a scouting report on Jack McBain during his time at the start of his NCAA career. This is via Dobber Prospects from April 2019, written by Tony Ferrari. During his first season in the NCAA with Boston College, McBain showed flashes of what made him a potential steal in the draft. At 6'4", 205 pounds, he already has a mature body and is likely to put on more size. McBain struggled with offensive consistency this season while adjusting to playing a higher level of competition. His 13 points in 35 games were a bit underwhelming, although the tools showed well, so an improvement in his point total is expected next season. While pure speed isn't an issue, his acceleration continues to plague him. Once he gets to top speed, he becomes a freight train on skates as he controls the puck well and powers past opposing players. His offensive instincts are good, but he could benefit from working on his first few strides as he has trailed play a few times. The center will return to BC next season. His fantasy upside is still quite good, assuming he matures his game as he develops in the NCAA. Now, that was 3 years ago. My goodness, yeah, 3 seasons ago. It was 2019, now it's 2022. So the development curve took a little bit longer than we probably would have expected, but he's still gone out there and improved quite significantly over the past 3 years. So if it really is the case here that McBain just probably would not want to go to Minnesota, whether that's because there's a lot of forwards on the team already, there are a lot of young guys that will be vying for spots, of course, Boldy, Fiala, Rossi. Actually, we don't really know if Fiala's going to be sticking around anytime soon, but you could say it might be a lack of opportunity, why McBain would apparently not want to go to Minnesota and not want to sign there. Is this just a situation where the Wild really want to trade this guy because they want to see what else they can get instead? I'm not really too sure. Honestly, if you want to talk about playoff rentals, guys that can go out there and maybe do something for you, if McBain was willing to sign, I would totally understand why the Wild would take him on, you know? Like, I don't really see the Wild having a reason to move him unless he just doesn't want to go. Think about it like this. All the good stuff that we have been saying about Jack McBain and how he's been improving and how he's started scoring a heck of a lot more goals, he's using his underrated shot, he's under a goal a game, all this stuff. The Minnesota Wild would probably want a guy like that to come onto their team, right? Especially at an entry-level deal where he's going to be cheap and he's going to be playing anywhere they want to play him. There's probably some versatility because he's got a solid 200-foot game, so you could play him at the top, play him at the bottom, play him on the PK, whatever. When it comes to any kind of playoff rental, Jack McBain fills the profile of what a playoff rental could be, except he's already in the system and he wouldn't be signed to a 1-year contract, he would be signed to a 3-year contract instead. So, for the Wild, it is kind of interesting. If he does not want to come back and he doesn't want to re-sign, then okay, that's kind of why they would need to trade him in the first place. But a second-round pick as an asking price is pretty fair to me. Let me know in the comments your thoughts about Jack McBain and the prospect profile that he does possess. I hope you enjoyed this British Rolls 99. and bye.